Okay, so welcome everyone to Chevalier's Books Online. We are the oldest independent bookstore in Los Angeles, established in 1940. So that makes 80 years in business now. Today, we are very excited to be hosting Gwen Goodkin for her debut short story collection, A Place Remote, pictured here. Doing us the honor of interviewing her is Rich Ferguson. Rich is the State of California Beat Poet Laureate and the author of the novel New Jersey Me. He has two poetry collections, Ace and Agony here, and the forthcoming Everything is Radiant Between the Hates, out January 2021. Yes, but he is also a very beloved friend of Chevalier's Books, so we are very grateful that he is here with us tonight. And his interviewee is our main star, Gwen Goodkin. Gwen has been nominated not once, but twice for a Pushcart Prize and has also won the Folio Editor's Prize for Fiction, as well as the John Steinbeck Award for Fiction. And tonight we are celebrating her very special debut collection, A Place Remote. It's a collection of stories that takes us into the heart of a rural Ohio town. That being said, I'd like to hand over the stage to our speakers for the night. Please give a very warm online welcome to Rich Ferguson and Gwen Goodkin.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Teresa. Thanks, everyone, for spending your Friday night with us. Gwen, it's great to see you as always, even if it's online. And congratulations. It's a really wonderful collection. Why don't we start by talking a little about how we know each other.
Yeah, right. We met at the Squaw Valley Writers Workshop in 2007. So it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I can see a couple. I see Robert up there. I met him at Squaw in 2011. So yeah, we met at Squaw quite a while ago.
Yeah.
And both of us were kind of working on each of these, New Jersey Me, your book, and then I brought in some stories from A Place Remote, or a story. So yeah, it's been a while that we've known each other.
Yeah. Speaking of Squaw, I'm curious, and I know that you also went to grad school, and you can speak of that as well. I'm curious what you got from your time at Squaw in regards to helping, well, writing in general, but also putting the collection together, and also what grad school offered you in regards to writing in general or putting your collection together.
From Squaw specifically, what I got there it's a really great environment, very supportive. Everyone's happy to be there. It's in the mountains. It's kind of this beautiful place, and a lot of people seem to be in a good mood there, and it's just, a lot of camaraderie. So I felt very supported at that workshop. And as for my MFA, that's, it's more of a deeper dive into, what the craft, and, you're there for 2 years at least. I took longer because I had a baby in there. But in terms of putting together the short story collection, I just started writing short stories, as not as practice, but as a way to refine my craft. And I hadn't even really thought of putting them together into a book for quite a while until I'd written, almost all the book. So I would say my MFA experience definitely helped me refine my craft and help me work on things from, plot and sentence level and all of that. And from Squaw, I got really a sense of community. And I still, Squaw put this event up on their alumni website, and they're just really supportive and really come through for their alumni. So
yeah,
great.
Yeah, both at Squaw and in grad school. When you're in those workshops, you can often get some really good advice that helps to illuminate your writing in ways that, sometimes you just can't see it. And sometimes you can get some bad advice, which kind of ironically can turn out in some ways to be good advice. I'm curious if you could maybe talk on situations where you received, whether it was SQUA or at grad school, where you received some really good advice that just allowed you some insights into your writing that you weren't seeing, or conversely, bad advice that turned out to be really good advice in the long run?
Yeah, I do. Okay, so bad advice, this one strikes me right now, that, I was at a workshop once where, we went to listen to speakers talk. And the speaker of this particular session spoke and said that she started talking about short stories. And she said, well, short stories really are just, practice. And, what you should do with all your early short stories is just put them in a drawer and put it away and just forget about it, because you don't want anyone to see those early short stories. Well, these are my early short stories. So I didn't listen to that. A lot of times, I think the process of learning to write, also what you're learning to do is figure out which feedback works for you and which feedback doesn't. And that's part of the process of learning, is to learn what you should listen to and what you should ignore. Usually I find really the best advice is the one that you initially have a reaction to, where you're a little bit angry. And I always say that that's the truth that but you just aren't willing to admit yet. You know that that's true, that, this part isn't working. Well, no, it's working. That you're wrong. If you have an angry reaction to it immediately, that's the truth. I feel like you just need a few days to sit with it, and generally you'll come around. And I think that's true in writing and in life a lot of times, that, we react like that to the truth we aren't willing to admit yet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how those things can run in tandem, run parallel. Yeah, I think kind of along those lines, I was taking a UCLA one of those UCLA writers workshops or something, when I was working on a different novel. And, with workshops like that, you would bring in, like, I don't know, the first 20, 25 pages of a novel or something. Mm-hmm. And I remember the instructor, like, pointing to page 20 and saying, "This is where your novel begins." And I was like, "Oh no," Yeah. And so, but, the more I sat with it, I was like, and she's absolutely right. These 19 other pages were me, like, clearing my throat and, to step into this.
That happens a lot, I feel like, when people bring in novels to workshops. I feel like, you're always going to get, when you're in a workshop, you're always going to get someone that says, "Oh, your novel actually starts way back here." So yeah, spinning your wheels, clearing your throat type stuff.
Yeah, but I like how you said that usually some of that advice, like, when you first hear it, sometimes it's that advice that kind of triggers you at first,
Yeah.
But when you, as you said, when you sit with it, sometimes you're just like, oh, that stings, because, I think they have a point. I think they might be onto something.
Yeah.
So,
but
I'm sorry.
There's all kinds of characters in workshops too, and sometimes people just give you bad advice too. Motivated. They have their own motivations, whatever they may be. So, like I said, you just have to learn, who the characters are in the workshop. The more that you take the workshop, the more that you write, you just learn who to listen to and who to kind of just filter out. So
yeah. And I don't know how it's been for you when you, either at SQUA or grad school, or I know you also did an intensive at the Iowa Writers Workshop, and I want to talk about that in a moment. But, I've found for me sometimes, like, if I'm in a workshop with some people, and maybe some people who's writing that I kind of, like, if I've heard them read or whatever, I think, well, that's pretty good writing, but it's definitely kind of not like something I would write or whatever. I find it interesting sometimes those people have given me the best advice. Like, sometimes people that write completely different than the way I write have sometimes given me some of the best advice into my own writing.
Yeah, that's, that makes sense. I did have, a writing partner not a partner, we didn't write together, but a critique partner. And she wrote children's, middle grade. And actually it was better because then there was less, I don't know, there's less weirdness there. Like if you're writing the same thing, but if you're writing two different genres, because, we can all read and objectively, no matter what the genre is. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that works out fine. That's
Yeah, so the Iowa Writers Workshop, congrats. I mean, that was a big deal. And, I want you to talk about that a little bit, but also if you could also talk about, I've had friends that have completed grad school programs, MFA programs, and sometimes people have had really good experience with MFA programs, and sometimes people have come out of MFA programs like completely shell-shocked. They shut down, they can't write, just something in the experience, just like, I don't know if it was just, just too much, just in-depth looking at their work, and they just came out and they just couldn't look at it objectively or what, but I'm curious about how that experience was for you, and also just, if grad school or those experience have just blossomed you, or if there were ever periods where you were doubtful or anything.
Well, I think speaking to too much critique on you, you have to develop a thick skin as a writer. You just have to be able to take it. And, I get rejections all the time. I don't even know how many I get anymore. I get them weekly, multiple times a week. And some are just like a little pinch. And then some just kind of can really get you. So, you just gotta just keep going, put your head down, put your blinders on. I think Joan Rivers was the one that said, some mob guy gave her some advice that said, just keep your blinders on and keep going and just worry about yourself and your own work. So, but yes, I've definitely had times where I was just ready to quit. I tried to quit. I tried for a few months. I think probably like 2 or 3 months was the longest I went. And then, just your finger finds a pen and your pen finds a paper, and then you just start going, and then you're off on a tear again. So I get that. I get how you can get knocked off your horse or whatever by critique or too much critique. But I guess if you're a real writer, you just get back on and keep going. So
yeah. So, again, congrats, on the collection. It's really good. And one thing that really struck me when I started reading it is knowing you from Squaw and knowing you since then. I mean, you're very sweet. I mean, and I mean that in the kindest way. I don't mean that as, just, but you are sweet and you're easy to talk to, and like right in the first story, it was, and also you're very well spoken in real life. And
thank you.
And first of all, the first story, as our mini stories, are narrated by a male character, which we'll talk about. But it's really stripped down, and there's sort of a country vernacular, because these stories are like in Ohio, so it's very sort of country vernacular. It's very deliberate. It's very sort of raw at times. So I'm curious, when writing those stories, if that came, if speaking like that came naturally to you, was it something you kind of had to write your way into? Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the first story, which is Winnie.
Winnie.
And that story was just that guy's voice in my head. I heard it. It was very insistent. I mean, I think I sound crazy when I say this, but I could hear this guy's voice in my head. And he had a story he wanted to tell. He had to tell this story. And I didn't know how it was going to end when I started it. So, I went in just like, okay, let's do this. So that one was not hard for me to get into at all. I didn't have to do any kind of, ohm or anything like that to get into it. So, and the funny thing is when I look back at, every story is going to go through 10, 20, 30, some of mine went through 60 drafts, 60 revisions. But so when I got to the end and it had been published, I went and I looked back at the first draft, and his voice was the exact same. It did not change through all the revisions. It just stayed the exact same. So to get into his voice was easy. And then, a lot of the times the story is just kind of, the character dictates the voice to me more than, I don't force a voice on a character. The character's voice is what I can hear and what sounds natural to that character. So yeah, it's easier to drop back into Ohio vernacular for me because I, lived there and until I was 22. So, I was born and raised there. If you drop me in Ohio right now, I will not sound like this for very long. So, and I'll be a lot flatter and I'll sound a lot more like this.
Right. So of all the voices, of all the characters, of all the stories in the collection, and maybe there's more than one answer to this, but which one or which couple few would you say resonate the most closely with you, with who you are?
There's a triptych of stories. It's 3 stories. It's a daughter or sister. It starts as a daughter or sister. That one's called The Key. And then it goes to another story called Waver, and that's her brother. And then it goes to the mother, and it moves through time. And I would say that one of the stories that most closely resembles me is Waver, which is the brother's story. And it's short, and it's a very detached story. His voice is very detached, and his experience is very detached. He's gone through a lot of crap. And just the way that he's talking about just, 2 halves of yourself when you go somewhere and you have to become someone else and then you return. It's a story where he returns home and you don't fit there anymore. And I definitely had experiences with that where I go somewhere and then I go home and everyone's expecting me to be the same person and I'm not anymore. So in relation to that, I felt that a lot when I went to Germany and went to study. And so the last story in the collection is called A Month of Summer, and that's about a German exchange student. It's actually a man who's in his 40s now, looking back on his time as a German exchange student, which I was, but the story is total fiction. He's an opera singer. I don't know, anything about opera. I interviewed an opera singer for the story, but and that one's very close to me too, because it's a guy who's he's about to step on stage and finally get this role that he's wanted, this whole time. He's just been singing in the chorus and what they call a hobbyist, and he's finally got a role. And in some ways, I feel like this is this book for me. Like I finally am getting this out because it took 15 years to get a book published. So I feel like I'm stepping on stage with him, with this book. It's my moment on the stage. So
nice. Well said. Yes, and so true. I can totally relate to that. We were talking recently, and you said something that really stuck out to me. And I mentioned before how, like with Winnie, the first story written from a male voice, and as are a number of the stories in the collection. And you mentioned something really interesting, how writing male characters had been a feminist act for you. And I was hoping you could expand upon that.
Well, at first when I started writing these stories, all the stories are in first person point of view. So as a way for me, 15 years ago, to create a distance between the characters, the main characters and me, I made them male. It was just, that was a way I could keep them at arm's length, and it wasn't me. And then, I wrote a story from the male point of view. That was the first story that was published was A Boy with Sense. It's the second story in this collection. And that won the John Steinbeck Award that Teresa had mentioned. And so, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to keep doing this then. I guess that worked out. So let me keep going. And so I did a couple more, and then, it became more deliberate. At first, it wasn't as, deliberate choice. It wasn't like a feminist choice. It was just, let me try this out. And actually, and also I may say, women were so policed in how we behave and how we dress and how we talk and how we, whatever we do, it's like we're walking this tightrope of, I gotta be this way and I gotta say it like this and I can't be too aggressive but I have to be aggressive and so we're on this constant tightrope. And for men, when you're writing a male character, it's almost like, okay, I can relax a little bit. I can get away with more stuff. I can say these things. So I described it as kind of like when you have a tight shirt on and then you take it off and you put on a t-shirt, like it's a little bit easier to move, you have a little more room. So, it became more deliberate. And then, I decided, hey, men have been writing women's stories for millennia. And so I'm going to flip this dynamic and I'm going to write their stories and I'm going to do the best job I possibly can. So I'm at least going to make it believable that it's a man. So that was my goal.
Nice. Speaking of male, female, and speaking of Winnie, one thing that, well, a couple things that, kind of, as far as things that were unexpected in the writing, especially in the first story. Again, such a strong male voice. And also the way you set the story up, you have kind of a loser guy and the girl that you're convinced that is going to get out of the town and really just, as we both have our own stories of escaping from our small towns. I mean, that's kind of what my novel, New Jersey, Me, was all about. So you have this guy, loser guy, you're convinced is going to stay stuck in the town, and the girl that's going to get out. And at a certain point in the story, the trajectory sort of switch, and the female character is the one that gets stuck, and the guy is actually the one that gets out. Mm-hmm. And then comes back at a certain point to kind of, see what's happened and everything. And I'm curious if you could talk a little about that, if that was kind of a plot line you had from the beginning, or if it was something that those cross trajectories were something that came to you at a certain point while you were writing and it sort of surprised you, or?
As I was hearing his voice, there was a little surprise to it, like a little bit of disbelief almost at his story, but I really did not think that was how that story was going to end, honestly. I thought, he would go his way and she would go I really did not think it would end like that. So I was kind of surprised by it, and which I think is in the end enjoyable, right? I mean, that's
Absolutely.
The great part about writing, is to surprise yourself too with what happens in the story. And if you can surprise yourself, I think you can surprise the reader. So it wasn't deliberate at first. Of course, I revised to make sure, also with that story, I wanted to suspend for as long as possible the belief, of, I don't want to give too much away, but I wanted to keep their relationship a mystery for as long as I could. So that was very deliberate. That, tweezing a line in here and tweezing a little bit in there and pulling that off for as long as I could, the answer to what happens with them, was very deliberate. But, definitely wasn't, the ending was definitely not planned.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I do love those moments where you can even surprise yourself, where, and I've heard people like Janet Fitch and others like at Squaw and other places talk about that, those moments where, and it's something that you said at the beginning, kind of like where the characters are speaking through you, it's their voice, it's almost like their voices are writing you rather than you writing their voices. And I love it. I love those moments where the characters sort of like tell you their trajectory, their direction, as opposed to you forcing it upon them.
Yeah.
And that's really nice. When I was working on my novel, one of the hardest things for me to write, in the beginning, I eventually kind of found my voice and my way to write it, were sex scenes. Because I didn't want to write them in a cliche way, and you know, and yeah, and I don't know, it's, you know, there was part of me that maybe felt a little shy or whatever, just, and it was weird. And again, I just kind of figured it out and worked my way through it. And I'm curious if there were certain scenes or relationships or things in your collection that when you came up to those, you were just like, oh man, this is going to be really hard to write. Like, I don't know how to do this. I really have to think this through.
Well, it sure is much easier to write a sex scene when you're writing it as a man, like when the character's a man. So, and you're a woman, you know, right. If that's the scenario. But so that is also a benefit of switching perspectives there, so that it's again like away from you. I remember at a different workshop at Tin House, I went to another writing session, and that one was led by Steve Almond.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I have My Life in Heavy Metal on my bookshelf.
Yeah, that he wasn't my workshop leader, but he talked about sex scenes, like how to write sex scenes, and that's the best advice I've ever gotten. So he said, don't name the parts, just, you know, just imply it. And so, you know, that's how I wrote it. And now if I read another sex scene in another book, it's clunky if it's not written the way he advised. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of difficult things. And I guess how I feel about it is if you're writing something and it doesn't make you cry yourself, you're not going to be able to make a reader cry. So I mean, you have to go to those sensitive places in yourself. That's where the good stuff is. That's what at the Iowa Writers Workshop. My instructor there was a guy named Chris Offit, and he said, you know, where the shame is, that's the good stuff. So yeah. So it's, yeah, that's the conundrum of being a writer. You got to show those parts of yourself. Even though luckily with fiction, we can disguise it enough. But you know, I always say that, you know, you don't have to tell the truth, but you do have to tell the emotional truth, and you have to be truthful emotionally. And
I like that. You don't have to tell the truth, but you do have to tell the emotional truth.
Yeah.
That is so true. That could be one of those Post-it notes I put on my writing desk.
Yeah.
I have a few of them on my desk as is. Well, do you care to share something with us from the collection?
Yeah, actually I was going to read from one of the stories called Last Chance. And the reason I'm reading from Last Chance is because the only other time I read Last Chance was at Chevalier's. Yes, it was, Last Chance was originally published by Exposition Review, which is an LA-based literary magazine. So they had their launch party at Chevalier's for the issue. And so I read Last Chance there. So I'm going to read it again. This is my only other time. So.
Excellent.
This is also, I wanted to say, one of the few stories that has female narrators, has two, and they switch, they're fighting and they switch back and forth and kind of plead their case in the fight. So we're only going to hear from the main, there's a main character and then the woman she's fighting with. It. So we're only going to hear from her here, but okay, so Last Chance. A couple months after my big fight with Luann, I got lost in thought and found myself 50 feet from the trailer I once called home. One second, I was following a tractor itching to pass. The next second, there it was, boarded up, rotting from the inside out. Death trap. Ever since the day of my real-life nightmare, I'd gone out of my way to avoid it. I would drive an extra 15 minutes on country roads, past corn, soy, and wheat fields, in order to block my view of what was essentially a rusted dumpster. That day, when I caught sight of it, I slammed on the brakes and stared, unable to choose between turning around or driving past. I finally decided I'd seen the place. What difference did it make? Keep going. Can you believe, as I looked at it, my first thought wasn't about my poor mom or my shitty dad. It was about that damn loaf pan, how the meatloaf had sat on our counter for days, festering, drawing flies. It was the pan that sparked the fight between my mom and dad, and the fact that I'd never returned it to Luann, that was what she threw in my face during the argument. Minutes later, I found myself in Luann's driveway. How'd I get there from the trailer? I had no memory of the drive. The garage was open, her truck inside. I went to her front door. I was sure she'd slam it in my face, if she even opened the door at all. I rang the bell and moved to the corner where she couldn't see me. What? She said. I remember the loaf pan. Good for you. Go get yourself a cookie. She almost closed the door, but I stopped her. The pan, it might still be in the trailer. I don't care about the goddamn pan. Yes, you do. It's been 25 years. The pan's long gone, May. The trailer's been boarded up ever since what happened. There's a chance. She puffed a laugh. That place could fall down on our heads as soon as we stepped inside. Maybe, I said. Maybe not. Why do you want me to go? Bring Roger. I can't bring Roger. Oh, baloney. You're the only one. The only one what? Who's seen that part of me. So go show Roger. I can't. She folded her arms. He's your husband. Show him who you really are. Okay, I said, but I need you to go with me first. What? Why am I even talking to you? She flicked up her hands. I'm mad at you. Because you can't help yourself, and neither can I, so let's get this over with already. I turned and walked to my car. I was sure she'd follow me. She was too curious not to. I knew the pan was in there. I could feel its pull. Friendships that span decades can appear complicated at arm's length, but up close, they're more like a favorite blanket or teddy bear from childhood. Maybe there's only a scrap left. Maybe it's been lost forever, or in a few rare cases, it's treasured and cared for, within reach when you need it. In a friendship that endures, there's no wool to pull because that person knows you, whether you like it or not. She understands what makes you interesting and unique, why you were friends in the first place. She also remembers the unsavory bits. But the happy part of reviving a lost friendship is that you push all those annoying traits aside at first. Then the frustrations creep in a little at a time, and you're both back to being plain old you. Take me or toss me, you both eventually say in so many words. Sometimes that's when the friendship truly begins, when you both no longer give a holy hoot. And sometimes that's when the friendship breaks forever. Luann and I hit our make or break moment in the middle of a party. I was elbow deep into hosting yet another pampered chef shindig when I drew a line in the sand and walked straight out. My own house. Luann was up there hawking the pizza stone again. Always that friggin' pizza stone. I mean, those women all had the pizza stone. Try something new. When I slammed down my serving tray and left the house, I must have walked for over an hour. It took that long to stuff my own anger back in its cage. The cars were all gone when I came home, all except hers. I exhaled, pinching the bridge of my nose, said, might as well get it over with. Went inside like nothing, like I just stepped out to haul the trash. What in God's green earth happened to you, May, said Luann. I had to handle everything here by myself. The service, the pitch, the orders, the cleanup. Luann, I said, my only response to that is, it's about time. And then we go on to hear Luann's point of view.
Nice, nice. Thank you. Thank you for reading. You know, I wanted to read a passage that stood out to me from one of your stories, and you'll have to tell me the name of the story. I was going through the collection, but I'm going to read the quote and name that story.
I hope I can do it.
Okay, so let me read the quote, and then I'm going to ask you the question. So when people look at war and study it, it's divided into battles with a clear understanding of who was where, movements, consequences. When we soldiers are in the thick of things, we get our orders and follow them with no knowledge of what's around the next corner. We're in the dark about the big picture. So again, what story was that from?
How to Hold It All In.
Right, okay. So here's my question, especially that last line, we're in the dark about the big picture. And as I was reading that, I was wondering, you know, you could even look at that passage and think like, wow, that passage is not only about war, but you could even look at that passage about how it is to write a novel or just anything, or a collection of stories where you are sometimes in the thick of it and you're kind of in the dark about the bigger picture. And I was curious if you could look at that passage for a moment from the perspective of turning it into maybe something that's being said about the process of writing and how it reflects upon your process of writing this collection?
Well, as you're reading it, I was thinking, well, that's just life too, right? I mean,
Right.
you know, we never know. I mean, I got that passage came to me because, you know, part of that story, how to hold it all in, is my grandfather's own war story. It when they're talking about, you know, hauling the guns up the mountain and fighting on the island, that was really his story. And what I got from talking to him about that was what I got from talking to him about war, was that they didn't, you know, we have the perspective of, you know, let's say World War II, to look back and know how the battles were arranged and how things went, and you can see the whole picture, but they couldn't. They just got orders and they moved, you know, they got orders to take this hill and move 50 feet and then move 50 feet more. They didn't know what was you know, what was ahead. They didn't know what the big picture was. They're just out there, you know, holding the line or moving it forward. So yeah, I think it definitely relates to a lot of things in life. And, you know, especially writing too. You know, there are people who plot out their novels and have it all planned. I am not one of those people at all. I think that takes the fun out of it, honestly. I mean, I want to discover the story as I go as well. That means I have to revise a lot, and the people who plot out their novels don't, but you know, that's not my personality. So definitely, as I said, with this collection, I really didn't see it as a collection for a long time. I just was looking only, okay, I wrote this story and I'm going to publish this story, and then I wrote, you know, now I'm going to publish this story, and then, you know, after I'd had most of them published, then I thought, oh, okay, then I guess I should put them together in a book. And then when you're putting them together in a book, you have to come up with, you know, what's called a log line. You have to come up with a summary. And then I had to really think about what unified this collection. And, you know, it was unified by place, which is, you know, of course, reflected in the title. So, yeah, that quote definitely makes sense in terms of, especially this book for me.
Yeah, so I know that you write in multiple genres and, you know, screenplays, poetry, one-act plays, and I'd be curious to hear you talk about those different genres and also maybe how one informs the other.
Okay, it was interesting too, where I decided to end the story that I just read with the line, "It's about time." Because I had, you know, taken this story, Last Chance, and kind of turned it into just a 10-minute play. I went to a playwriting workshop and I hung out with a bunch of playwrights and learned that the easiest way to get something produced is to write a 10-minute play. And then on top of it, there's something called a two-hander, which is just two actors. So I'm like, well, I can write a 10-minute two-hander with this story right here. And as I was writing it, though, I thought, well, that Last Chance title doesn't work. So I changed the title of the 10-minute play to "It's About Time," which is the last thing she says in that excerpt that I read. So I think it's definitely a different, you know, part of your brain you're using when you're writing screenplays and stage plays, because it's all external. You know, you have to make everything external. And I think I think playwriting is actually the hardest genre to write, because not only is it external, but you're in this box, you know, in front of an audience of people, and you have to keep their attention for however long your play is. You have to, you know, you can't give them some boring exposition. Like, you have to keep it moving. Whereas in a movie, you can say, okay, interior, you can do an interior shot, and then you can cut to an exterior. You know, you can do a lot in editing that you don't, that, you know, you can fill in gaps or move it around in the editing, which you don't have the privilege of doing for a play. So, and the reason why I think it's, you know, a good thing to do to adapt short stories is you can actually add to the story when you adapt it to the screen or stage, rather than with a novel, you have to take away, you have to condense and throw things out. So I've actually, you know, learned more about my own stories by adapting them for the screen and the stage. So it's fun. I like
Yeah.
it.
Did
Yeah.
any of these stories start out as maybe scenes from a play or scenes from a screenplay before you adapted those into these short stories, or?
I tried that once, and then it was like, well, the story's already written, so it wasn't as interesting to me to go the opposite direction. So that, no, I didn't do that. I have written one feature film screenplay that is only made, I think, only made for film. Like, it's not real. I don't think it would go backwards to prose. It wouldn't be good. So usually I do it the other way around. Prose
Yeah.
first, and then, yeah.
So speaking of these different forms of writing there and everything, one story that really jumped out at me, Just Less is Fine. I think that's the title.
Yeah.
And it sort of reads in the beginning kind of like a traditional short story. And then there's a point where it breaks into these, you have footnotes and character studies and all these different things. And at a certain point, it almost like feels like, you know, I've wandered into a world of David Foster Wallace or George Saunders. It gets kind of meta and everything. And I'm curious about how that came about.
It was funny when you were talking before about letting the characters, kind of show you the story. I was gonna say that's the one story where I, knuckled down. I just said, no, I'm gonna direct this story. And I even put it into the notes, and it kind of became kind of an existential kind of struggle with my main character. But the notes came about because I had taken the story for a workshop, and one of the comments was, "Oh, this reminds me of American Beauty," and I thought, "Oh gosh, yeah, you're right." That was one of those, "Oh gosh, yeah," moments. So I kind of stuck it in a drawer and ignored it for a while, and then I came back to it, and I'd seen an interview with Alice Munro where she had said something, or her editor, I can't remember, where they had said she'll write like 200-page character studies on her characters that are in her short stories. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to try a character study. And so I got to about, a page and a half per character. And I thought, oh, that's good enough. And then I just, put that aside. And then a few years later, I don't know, a year later, I came back to it and I read the character study and it made me laugh. I just thought, oh my gosh, this is funny. I'm going to figure out a way to put this in. So that's how that happened. I just said, I'm just going to put it in like this. I'm not going to hide it. I'm going to have it come out. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to put this in there, it's got to affect the story in some way. It can't just be there and just be static. It's got to, that's so then that's why I have Les, the main character, start interacting with the character study and the brackets, the text in the brackets.
Nice. It was a really nice touch. When I was writing New Jersey Me, one of the things that the narrator Mark kind of struggles with throughout the novel is there are things about his life in that small town in Jersey that just repulse him, and it's those are the things that make him want to leave. But then there are those certain beauties of the town, either people in the town or just certain things about the town that kind of draw him to it, that keep him from leaving. So there's that constant tension. I'm curious, either through the characters in your stories or even your own personal experiences about this town in Ohio, just that tension of the push and pull. If you could talk a little about that, either through the voices of your characters or just through your own time in this town, the things that drew you to it and the things that just made you just want to leave.
Well, the interesting thing is that my childhood was kind of split. And so I grew up in a suburb, I started in a suburb of Cleveland. So I wasn't born in this small town. I came in as, even though it's my family's hometown, when I came in, I was an outsider, which was bad personally, which was not a great experience. in certain ways, it was a great experience in certain ways and not a great experience in others. And the great experience was, people, I had friends who were curious to instantly, I remember a group of girls that came over to my house and they said, "Oh, we heard you're new in town. We want to meet you." And I was like, what is this? This is strange. So I had to adapt myself and I had to adapt to that. But, that was great, to just initially have people come and welcome you in, but then there are other people who kind of keep you at arm's length and, you're an outsider and that kind of thing. But the great thing about it as a writer is that, when I went in there, I was an observer. I got to observe, I was a bit of an outsider and I observed the small town. And, as I started writing, it was the observer in me that came out and, wanted to kind of puzzle my way through my experience in that small town. So I think the things that are great about small towns are they're very focused on community. They support each other. They, show up when things get rough. They'll, like the small town that I'm from, it flooded and everyone in the community came together to like clean up after the flood. And but I think there can be harmful things about small towns, especially if you're someone who is different. And for some reason, there's a fear in that, and it can be limiting and harmful and it can hinder you as a person and make you want to leave. So, and I did feel a bit different in my small town, as I said, because I came in as an outsider. So that was I think, part of the reason why I wanted to leave was to just be my different self and that's one of the things I love about LA. A lot of people, I live in San Diego, a lot of people criticize LA. Oh, LA, traffic, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, the thing I love about LA is that everyone's trying to stand out and they're just so much themselves. It's like everyone wants to show their individual side, and that's what I love about it. If all the world's a stage, LA is the best stage. I love visiting and seeing everyone, show themselves and be proud of who they are as individuals, and that's my favorite thing about LA. So
yeah, but my mom lives in North Carolina, and when she first came to visit me, the first place I took her to was the Venice Boardwalk. I think that was a little too overwhelming. She was like, "Oh dear, is everyone in LA like this?" I'm like, "Well, maybe I should have eased you into this. Maybe I should have taken you to Larchmont first or something."
yeah.
How are we doing for time, Teresa?
So I think it's just about the perfect time actually to introduce the audience Q&A. So again, everyone, if you want to ask a question, there are two ways. You could either drop your question into the chat box, or if you'd like, you can raise your hand, which you should see the option to on the bottom of the screen. I will get a notification and I can unmute you so you can ask your question in person. I'm going to go ahead and use my privilege as host to ask the very first question, which is actually related to the one you just answered, Gwen. And this is really a question that you both can answer, I think, because what I want to ask is, in a collection like this, it always feels like the locale or the town that it takes place in is very much a character along with the people. And it very much, influences in colors and influences the plot line. And I know Rich, New Jersey Me, very much the same thing. So I wanted to hear from both of you about how did you purposefully try to make the locale stand out as a character, or were things, just subtle and coming in on their own? What was that writing experience like?
Go ahead, Gwen. I have some thoughts on that, but Gwen, you go ahead first.
Okay. With my book, a few people have asked me about Winesburg, Ohio, and how it compares to that. And for me, the fact that it's a small town, that I'm writing at a small town in Ohio, and I didn't purposely, I really didn't reference Winesburg, Ohio. I've read it once and it was a long time ago. But that, here I am 100 years later writing a book set in a small town that's comprised of a bunch of different voices, I think speaks to small towns in that, you know, it's a lot of different voices that come together to make up one small town. So I don't know, that's my answer for that. I know, Rich, you have an answer. So.
Yeah, getting back to Squaw and, hearing different writers, again, Janet Fitch and other writers talking about the importance of place and things like that, and letting, bringing in the senses and everything. I was very conscious about making this town a character on its own. And also there is a nuclear power plant within this town. And I was very conscious about making even the power plant within the town its own character too, because really that's one of Mark's, rivaling his high school bully. The power plant is, one of his greatest enemies throughout the novel, just this metaphor for, poison and catastrophe. And so, yeah, I think that's a great question. And I was really conscious of it. And I was also very conscious of it because if it were ever turned into a screenplay, and I did eventually turn it into a screenplay myself, because I had never written one and just wanted to experience that. But I also cast the town as a character because I wanted that to really come through if it, through a screenplay and that kind of stuff too. So I was looking at the novel very visually.
Got it. So we do have a question from Ileana. I'm going to get to yours, but first I actually want to do Cesar Perez's because it's a little related to what we just talked about. He asked, which environment has the greatest influence on your writing? LA, Ohio, or San Diego? San Diego is often referred to as a small town.
Hey, Cesar. I definitely wouldn't consider San Diego a small town. But I mean, it's a smaller city, I guess. But the greatest influence on my writing, LA, Ohio. What's interesting is that I now almost completed a second book of short stories, and they're all almost completely based in California. So I think what happens is it's just a progression. So, when I started writing 15 years ago, Ohio was still very close to me, and I wanted to look at it. And, it helps when you're at a distance from something and you can look at it from afar and think about it. But now this is where I live, and this is where I've lived for, 17 years. So naturally my stories are going to shift locale to here. So a lot of them take place in Southern California, kind of an indistinct Southern California place. So I don't know if that's for Rich as well or just for me.
But... No, I would say let's move on with questions for you. This is your night. So
okay. And then it looks like Ileana's was, what motivated you to begin to write? I have a daughter and we are both listening to your journey. What I started actually and as an undergraduate, I started writing poetry, and it wasn't very good. So I kind of set that aside. And then after I graduated from college, I got a job, and I didn't write for I don't know, probably 5 years. I just worked hard at having fun. So it was only when I moved down to San Diego. I had first lived in LA for a little while, and then moved down to San Diego, and I was working from home. And my husband was traveling, so I was kind of home by myself a lot, didn't know many people. So I thought, well, I got to fill the time here some way. So then, then I went back to writing just a little bit at a time. And it's interesting, I didn't really go back to poetry. I started with my first workshop, or my first writing class was at UCLA Extension writing class. So I started writing short stories. I don't know why I shifted direction, but maybe that's because I was reading more prose and not so much poetry. But so yeah, that's what got me writing again.
So if anyone has any more questions, use the Zoom raise your hand function, or drop your question into the chat box. Otherwise, I have another question. I hate to dominate the Q&A, but I have a question. This is again for both of you because you just talked about Gwen, different mediums of writing. Of course, you found one that clicked with you the best. But I'm always curious about people who do dip their toes into several different writing genres. When you sit down at your desk and start to write, do you, depending on like whether it's poetry or a short story or a novel, do you find yourself like opening a different mental toolbox or having a different mindset when you come into the writing, a different goal? I'm always curious about how it feels to write in different genres.
Gwen?
I definitely, there's a different approach. I don't know if it's a different mindset, but it's a different approach, whether I'm writing prose or screenplay or play. Screenplays, you know, they have a lot of, you got to do this by this time and do that by that time. And I don't do that in drafts. Like when I'm first writing it, I just write it and then I'll go back and look. This screenplay I wrote most recently was a comedy and I just had fun with that. And I decided, you know, I'm not as emotionally attached to this movie. I'm just doing this because I want to laugh and I think it's funny and I have this funny story. And so I got out that book called Save the Cat. It's a screenwriting book. And I just said, okay, I'm just gonna do what he tells me to do here. I'm just gonna, by this minute, by 10 minutes in, I should have, you know, laid out all the main characters. And by this, so I just checked it off and, you know, I just took it that way. But yeah, when you're writing for screen or stage, you have to start to think externally. You can't, you know, have these musings going on in those. So you have to think, what's the action? What's, you know, it's more action than it is, you know, internal. Prose can be very internal, but you got to get to the action in those. So.
Yeah, for New Jersey me, that, and I was talking to Gwen about this a little while back, the novel actually came out of a spoken word piece, a performance poem that I'd written called Terry, Candy, Baby, and Me. And the voice of the narrator in this spoken word performance piece was kind of like what Gwen was saying earlier with like Winnie, like the voice of this narrator was just so strong in my head. I just couldn't get over it. And I found that after I'd written this piece, I kept wanting to write more things in this guy's voice. And, you know, originally they started to develop into what would eventually become the novel New Jersey Me. And eventually I had first tried writing the novel as a novel in stories. And I had presented it to Tyson Cornell at Rare Bird Books. And he's like, and he was very nice about it. He's like, yeah, this shows some promise, but, you know, let me pair you up with an editor. And Seth Fisher, who is amazing and really helped to make my writing, to shape it into a novel. And he basically, it was kind of one of those things we talked about earlier where someone looks at your writing and just points something out and it just like stings so much, but you're just like, oh, they're right, you know. And he just was like, I think you should probably try gutting this novel and stories thing and just rewrite the whole novel as like a traditional novel with chapters. And at first I didn't think I could do it. I was just ready to abandon it and just say, I can't do it. This is too much for me. And I tried, and I eventually gained more confidence, and the novel started speaking to me in ways it hadn't before. And I was having so many moments of those surprise that we spoke about before, because I had written it all in stories and a lot of them got thrown out. I knew the characters on so many different levels that when I started writing it in traditional chapters, not only did they speak to me in those voices, but they surprised me and spoke in even deeper voices. So that was really good. I was very deliberate about writing the novel. I kind of had to be, because it was a form that I wasn't used to. So I was workshopping, going to workshops with Sid Stiebel, who sadly passed away not long ago, but I'd go to his workshop like pretty much every week, workshopping the novel. So I was very deliberate about plot and everything. And when Seth was editing it, I was even more conscious about, you know, everything. And there was a chapter in the novel where I was just like, I've got to bust loose. Like, I am so sick of like plot and making these characters do these things. I just want to write poetry. And I found a chapter where my main character, Mark, has this sort of he's sitting in math class, and he basically just this internal spoken word poem, and it goes on for like a page and a half. And I handed it in to Seth, and I was thinking, he's gonna hate this. I love it. He's gonna hate it. And he wrote back his notes. He was like, wow, this is great. You know, I was like, wow, this is so good. So that was a moment where I could really kind of just let go of the reins of, you know, fiction and just get back into my natural world of poetry. And it really worked in that moment. So yeah, but I am very deliberate from one to the other.
Yeah, I'm a snowboarder, and one of my snowboarding sayings is, you don't fall once when you're snowboarding, you're not trying hard enough. So, you know, you always gotta push yourself a little bit past your comfort zone, and take a little bit of a fall, I think.
Rebecca, did you have a question?
Oh. Let me see.
No.
Hi. First of all, Gwen, you look fantastic.
Thanks. I took a shower. No.
Yeah. Hey, it's a new thing. Question I have for you, something that I think is still a little bit underappreciated right now is just how different the culture is in the vast unknown interior of America. And when you're writing stories that come from that interior of America, do you consciously consider the things that you want people who are not from that place to know? Or is it something that just rises to the top for you?
No, I'm not writing with a particular, like, I'm not thinking about the particular person who's gonna read it in the end. Although I did have, you know, was very set on some of the ways that they spoke. I wanted to make sure that got in there. Like, there's a term in there that I have where one of the guys says, yep, like that. And I was very deliberate. I think my editor said, well, why don't we just say yeah? And then she realized I said it a few times. So I'm like, no, it has to be yep. You know, that's exactly how they would say it. And it's funny because I had someone from my hometown write me a note and say, oh my gosh, yep, I can hear it. She just wrote me like last week and was laughing about that. So I definitely didn't deliberately say, oh, I want to teach the world about these people. I would say one deliberate thing I did was I wanted to make sure they weren't all blue collar workers. I wanted to make sure, because the town is not just made up of, small towns are not just made up of blue collar workers. So I deliberately wanted Les to be an optometrist, and just Les is fine. I wanted there to be, college educated and person in the town, as there are, you know, doctors and dentists and optometrists and things like that, teachers. So, yeah.
All right, so everyone, I think we're just about over the hour. I think it's a perfect time to say goodnight, sadly. I want to make sure to thank everyone here for joining us. It is a Friday evening and you chose to spend it with us, so we feel very honored. And of course, million thank yous to our speakers tonight, Rich Ferguson and Gwen Goodkin. You guys were awesome, and thank you so much for sharing all of your writer's secrets and intellect, and Gwen for writing this book, of course. Again, I want to mention, if you want to order a copy of A Place Remote online, I'm going to drop the link in the chat box right now, so make sure to click it before it disappears. And secondly, if you want to buy it at Chevalier's Books, you can go to our website, chevaliersbooks.com, and request a book that way. Pick it up in store. All right, before we close out, Rich and Gwen, do you have any last words to share with us?
I just want to say thank you so much for hosting this event. Love you guys, and hope to get up there soon. Thank you. And thanks to everyone for coming on a Friday night. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Chevaliers. I live within walking distance of the store, so I look forward to walking back up there, and I look forward to seeing Liz again. And thanks to all of you for being here. You could be doing 1,000,001 things tonight. And I just hope you all stay healthy, full of heart, and look forward
Agreed.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Friday night and have a great weekend. Good night.